Right. Hello, guys. Sorry about the delay. I think everything is working. If you could just double confirm that in the chat, that would be ideal. I think I've got it all sort of set up. But for me, it looks good. So, welcome to our Premier League Game Week 4 preview. First game back after the international break. So, we have to be a bit wary of these fixtures. But regardless, I think there's some really nice matchups, good games to get stuck into. And I'll be covering 6 games in this video. Um, Thank you guys for joining. If you do have any videos or if you do have any suggestions of bets or angles that you want to put forward, feel free to put them in the chat. If you're watching this after the live is gone sort of public, again, feel free to comment and I'll happily go through them. So, without wasting any time, the first game to cover is Southampton against Man United. So it's a 12:30 early kickoff at St Mary's. Southampton currently find themselves on 0 points. They've lost to Newcastle, Forest, and Brentford. So disappointing start to the season for them on their return. It hasn't been an ideal start either for Eric Ten Hag. He scraped the win against Fulham on the opening day, but then followed that up with back-to-back defeats against Brighton and Liverpool. So both managers find themselves under a bit of pressure to start the season. They'll be desperate to sort of pick up some momentum after this international break. Diving into the injury report, Southampton have 3 injuries to contend with, the most notable probably being Gavin Bazunu, but there's no new concerns over the break, so that's a positive sign for them at least. The injury to Bazunu probably gives Ramsdale another start. For United, it's a bit more complicated. They've got 7 injuries, which is the joint most in the league. Bruno Fernandes is probably the most notable one who's listed on the injury report. However, he is probably the most resilient player in the league. I think whenever he's doubtful, he tends to start. And in that game where he was injured, he played the full 90. He scored as well. So you'd imagine he starts. So there's not really any new concerns for either manager over the break. So the first bet that I've got in mind is for Kyle Walker-Peters to have some shots. He's currently priced 1.57 for one shot on Paddy Power, which is obviously quite short, but the angle we're focusing on here is the longer one. So he's over 3-1 to have 2 shots, and he's 4-1 to have a shot on target. Paddy Power's best price here. 365 are slightly behind. Still, I would say good value over there, but Paddy Power or Betfair is where you want to be putting this on. So Kyle Walker-Peters has had at least one shot in every game so far. He's sort of operated as a left wing back on paper. However, if you watch the game, that's not really the case. He's more of a sort of advanced, inverted, left-sided player. It's kind of hard to describe how he plays, but he sees a lot of the ball in the system. He has a lot of freedom to get forward, mostly popping up in midfield, and being right-footed on the left sort of wing. Naturally, he'll want to invert, and in doing so, he finds himself in really, really good shooting positions. He doesn't always shoot when he's in those positions, but again, if he's in those positions, that's what really matters. And he's also very likely to play the full 90, I would say, in this game. So, really, really like his shot price. He registered 2 shots against Newcastle in the first game. Obviously, that was impacted by a red card. But then he had 3 shots against Nottingham Forest in the next game and 1 shot against Brentford. So the only home game he's played so far against Forest, he had 3 shots and one on target. So that would have landed obviously both long shots, which bodes really, really well. So that's the first bet for me. Kyle Walker-Peters to have 2 shots and a shot on target. I don't think I'll be playing anything with one shot. It's just a bit too short. And I'll focus more on the long shots here. The next angle of interest is to do with Kobe Mainu. So he's actually priced at 1.53 with Bet365 to commit a foul. So far this season, he's made a foul in every game, um, and he's also made two fouls in every game. So I think that stat alone makes sort of 2-to-1 price look pretty good value. He's priced at 1.29 to make a foul with Sky, so they are generally shorter than 365, but it's indicative of some good value. Southampton have been a good side to draw fouls so far. They drew 15 fouls against Newcastle, 14 fouls from Forest, and 10 from Brentford. That's obviously been because they've seen quite a lot of the ball in those games. So they've got 78% possession against Newcastle. I think we'll probably ignore that game because it's a bit of an anomaly with the red card. But 65% against Forest, 63% against Brentford. I do expect them to see a sort of drawdown in those numbers because neither Forest or Brentford are really ball playing teams. They don't like the ball really. I think for Southampton, Russell Martin's tried to sort of play how he did last season in the Championship, rather than adjust his play style too much. So we've seen Southampton try to get on the ball, try to keep possession, be like quite not necessarily transitional. And in doing so, in seeing so much of the ball, they've been able to draw a decent amount of fouls. So who is the main who is the target here? If we look into the fouls drawn data, the top two players we'll find is Joe Aribo and Kyle Walker-Peters, both of which, obviously Kyle Walker-Peters plays as a left back on paper, but in reality he mostly finds himself in midfield. So essentially you've got two midfielders for Southampton drawing the most fouls in the team, and they should directly find duels against Manu. So I think it's a really nice matchup. The data looks great. 1.53 is obviously a bit short, but I wouldn't be too deterred from going for the long shots. 2.25 for a cow could be a shot, could be foul. Yeah, I think that's a good double. Um, I'm gonna go through other angles that you could potentially double it with. So I would rather play the cow will compete a shot on Paddy for this one. But I'll explain to you why. I will post unit sizes in my Telegram, so I won't suggest them here because I haven't really finalized them yet. But it will all be posted in the Telegram channel if you want to join. So yeah, third angle is Man United tackles. Again, it's a shorter selection. Um, I think the main line is good value, but we're going to focus on the over 16.5 line, which is priced at 1.5. So it's this one here. Value is held here nicely. So Man United have been obviously more intent on pressing so far this season under Ten Hag, and in doing so, they've been able to rack up some massive, massive tackle counts. They made 24 tackles against Man City in the Community Shield. Obviously, they didn't see much of the ball, so that would naturally inflate their tackle counts. But they also had 21 against Fulham and 18 against Brighton, 32 against Liverpool. So they've got a fairly decent floor. I would say it's sort of around the 16, 17 mark, but they've got a very, very high ceiling. I really like the idea of backing tackles, especially if Southampton sort of see more possession of the ball. If Man United could take an early lead, for example, which I would say is somewhat likely, we should see Southampton get more of the ball, have more possession, which should work to draw more tackles. So, game state wise, I think sort of Man United tackles is one to back. It is quite short, as I said, so we'll have a look at sort of things you can double it with. The first one is a Man United offside. So Man United were caught offside three times against Fulham and six times against Brighton. They were sort of more intent on playing very direct, getting in behind, things like that. So they didn't record an offside against Liverpool, but I think we've seen a shift to them playing more direct, getting in behind more, and that should result in more offsides. I also kind of don't mind backing just an offside because you can get it from like a set piece. We've seen Casemiro from set pieces. Obviously, I'm not sure if he starts, but he sort of tends to just kind of stand in an offside position to start off with, and he normally wins a header. So I like the idea of an offside for Man United just to boost the odds here. It's also landed in every game against Southampton so far. So data looks good, and I think it's a nice sort of thing to just double it with. If we look back to Kobe Mainu fouls, this I'm a bit skeptical of backing. So I did have a second price to double it with initially, and I was thinking to do Lisandro Martinez tackles, but the odds have dropped slightly. So we'll see what it comes out as now. Yeah, so it's 1.7, which is probably too short to back, I would say. Because of that, I'd probably be more inclined to play it as I'd be more inclined to play the 2-1 Kobe Menu over 1.5 fouls. Um, or if you have something else you would like to double it with, I would please put that in the chat. But I did have this initially I had Lissandro Martinez to make a tackle because that's landed in every game so far, including the Community Shield. The way he plays, he's very sort of aggressive. He likes to get tight to his opposition striker, and Southampton play a strike partnership in Armstrong and Brereton Diaz, so he's likely to find a good matchup. He made three tackles against Liverpool, three tackles against Fulham, so he obviously isn't one to shy away from a duel. So that was the initial thought process. Obviously now because the price has dropped, probably needs to be rethought. But that was that was the bets I had for the first game, Man United against Southampton. I would be wary; it's an early kickoff, but I wouldn't want to overstake on it. But I think there's enough value to sort of go for it. I would normally avoid it, as I say, the value's there, so we might as well take it. Next game to go through is Crystal Palace against Leicester, which is a 3 o'clock game uh, at Selhurst Park. Crystal Palace have not been able to replicate their sort of late season form that they had under Glasner last season. They're currently winless. They started with two losses against Brentford and West Ham, and then drew against Stamford Bridge, which was a pretty fortunate result in the end, considering how many chances Chelsea had. It's been a similar story for Leicester. They've struggled on their return. They drew at the King Power against Spurs, which was a good result for them, but they followed that up with two defeats against Fulham, Aston Villa. Both of those are tough fixtures, so shouldn't really read too much into it. Um, However, both managers again will be under a bit of pressure, and it sort of makes a positive result here pretty crucial for both of them. Um, for Crystal Palace, they've got a bit of a got quite a big issue at the moment, and it's in regards to their defense. So obviously, Anderson has departed to Fulham, he was one of their key players. Um, and Chadi Riyad recently did his ACL, so it leaves them a bit light in midfield. Rob Holding is obviously out, so that likely means Nathaniel Klein starts, which is obviously not ideal for Glasner. Wharton has also emerged as a slight doubt. He's got a 75% chance of playing, but with the likes of Lerma, Will Hughes, Crystal Palace are okay in midfield. For Leicester, the only sort of injury to note is Daka being out, Patson Daka, which just means Vardy is guaranteed to start. They've sort of looked to implement a few new signings, so predicting their lineup is a bit more difficult. However, I think we'll see a very similar one to which we saw before the break. Did you see the price for Taylor Bellis? Yeah, I did see it. I think it's 1.83 now, opened at 2.1. I think it's great value, actually. I was going to talk about it, but I've seen a lot of people post it, so I thought I'd try and sort of mention something original. But I think he's really struggled since he's started in the Prem. I'm not convinced he starts, actually. He was hooked early in the last game. One thing I will say is whenever you find those kind of bets where when a player changes the league and they sort of struggle to adapt, that's where you can find great value. So obviously his foul data was really low in the Championship when Southampton saw a lot of the ball. Now that he has to do a bit more defending, obviously he's making more fouls consistently, looking a bit shaky. So yeah, I really like the price. I think 1.83 is good value. I wouldn't take it much lower, and I'd just be wary of whether he starts or not. But yeah, thank you for that question. Back to Palace against Leicester. First bet I've got is Tyrick Mitchell to have a shot. Again, sticking with defenders to have a shot, which is currently 2.2 with Paddy Power, and he is 7.5 for two shots, which is massive. Considering not necessarily the data, but the positions that he sort of finds himself in, and um, yeah, how attacking he can be as the left wing back. He's had a shot in 3 out of 4 games for Crystal Palace so far in the league. No prizes for guessing the game I backed him in. Um, with one shot landing against Brentford, and then Norwich in the EFL Cup, and most recently against Chelsea. Under Glasner at home, so when he sort of switched to his left wing back role at home, he's landed one or more shots in 6 out of 9 games, and two shots landing in two of those games. So pretty decent return, and it makes these prices look good value. The two games that two shots landed, Leicester here is actually his best matchup so far. I don't think they're anything special. So defensively, they conceded 15 shots against Spurs, 18 against Fulham, and 10 against Villa. So as I say, really nice matchup for Mitchell here. I can see Crystal Palace creating a lot of chances in front of home support, especially given that they are winless. I think the crowd will be up for it. It's a big game. It's a very winnable game for them. So yeah, I really like Mitchell to have at least one shot. I think this is priced at evens with 365. Also good value, but again, Paddy Power are the bigger price here, so we'll take the value there. On a similar note, um, I also really like Eze shots, so I've I think the best price is Paddy Power here again. For him to have 4 shots and one on target is 2.25. I don't think that should be odds against. I think since Elise has left, he's seen a massive uptick in sort of attacking involvement and therefore shots. He had 7 shots against Brentford, followed by 5 shots against West Ham, 4 shots against Norwich, and then 3 against Chelsea, with a shot on target landing in all of those games. I think most notably, he's also not missed a minute in any game, which is pretty big. Even though we'll be covered by the super sub rule here, um, seeing as he has such a big role under Glasner, he takes free kicks, he is involved in pretty much everything from set pieces, corners. The ball just sort of gravitates towards him at times. The only matchup or the only game he's failed so far is against Chelsea, but he didn't really look his best in that game, and he still managed 3 shots and a goal. So, in a much simpler matchup, in my opinion, against Leicester, in front of a home crowd, I really, really like his prices for 4 shots. And I've added the shot on target just because every time he's had 4 shots this season, he's also had a shot on target. So I don't think they're sort of unrelated in a way. I think if he has 4 shots, he will have a shot on target. Looking into his sort of shot map, you see he's picking up some very, very good positions around zone 14, getting inside the box, and looking into his sort of his shots selection, you can see it's quite a broad range. So he's having shots from inside the box, outside the box, left foot, right foot, free kicks on corners, set pieces, on the break. So there's loads and loads of different ways that he sort of gets over this line. 4 shots is obviously quite a high line. We're asking for a lot, but I think given how he's a sort of talisman in this team, I think it should be shorter than it is, and it's good value. Third and final bet for this game is Munoz fouls. He's currently 1.83 to make 2 or more fouls with Paddy Power. A sort of under the radar signing for Leicester has been Jordan Ayew, actually arriving from Crystal Palace. He started the last two games, and he is likely to start again. He hasn't finished the 90, so I can't say for certain he'll start. But in Leicester's last game, um, he came off after 70 minutes, and it was Mavididi who replaced him. So two players who are good for drawing fouls, for different reasons. With Ayu, he has a tendency to go down very, very easily. He sort of invites pressure and then goes down pretty much straight away. Against Aston Villa, he drew five fouls doing that sort of exact thing. And in last season, actually, he drew 95 fouls in the entire season, which was the second most of all players. And considering he was sort of behind Elise and Eze in the pecking order, that's like fantastic. That's really, really good. He should find he should find Derek Jules against Munoz here. They'll be on the same side. Um, and looking into Munoz's data, so hard to ignore two fouls at just short of evens, considering he's made at least two fouls in three out of four games so far. And under Glasner, it's landed in 13 out of 20 since he arrived in January. That rises to 7 out of 10 when playing at home. So data looks fantastic here. Matchup is really good. In terms of Mavididi, he's a player who sort of likes to dribble a bit more. He likes to see a lot of the ball. Um, I think if he's to face Munoz towards the end of the game when Munoz is a bit tired, I think it's a perfect matchup, and I think there's really really high potential for a ladder here. Sky have got two fouls at 1.67. Again, that's suggestive of good value. And I'll probably be playing the three fouls and potentially a card because I think the matchup for both players is really really good. Next game is Man City against Brentford. Again, a 3 o'clock game, so we've got limited markets, but it's at the Etihad. City have started flawlessly, 3 wins from three, which is a bit unusual for them. You usually see them sort of start a bit shakily at the start of the season, um, and I think people would have thought they would drop more point or some points at least because Rodri's obviously been out, but they haven't. They've been incredible. Performances have been fantastic. And a boost for them is Rodri is set to return. So he did start in Spain's second Nations League game. Didn't play the full 90, but he seems to be at full fitness now and wouldn't be surprised to see him start this game and potentially play the full 90 for the first time this season. It's been a solid start for Brentford as well. They've won against Crystal Palace and Southampton, and in between that they lost to Liverpool at Anfield, which obviously you can't really fault them for that. They've lost Ivan Toney, but Mbeumo and Wissa have started the season hot. They've both scored in two games so far. Mbeumo scored three goals. Wissa scored two. So those two are in good form, and I think a lean for me would be both teams to score. Um, Not a particularly data-backed one, but I just think Brentford have the players to cause City problems, and they find themselves in good form. So I think both teams to score is currently 1.8 with 365. Not not 100% sure if I'll be backing it yet, but it's a sort of lean that is on my mind as a potential. City were affected slightly by injuries over the break as Ake got injured for Netherlands. However, he was unlikely to start anyway. It would have been Guardiola in his place. Most notable injuries: Phil Foden and Savio. Phil Foden is ill. However, even if he is fit, I doubt he starts. I would sort of prefer to see wingers of Grealish and Doku, or if Savio is available, Doku and Savio. I think they work really nicely in the City system. Not too much to report for City. For Brentford, they're still without Henry and Aaron Hickey, so they're a bit light at fullback. I think we see a similar lineup to what we saw against Liverpool. Um, I think Lewis Potter might drop out potentially for Damsgaard, but I think we see a pretty unchanged lineup for Brentford as well. For me, the target here, I don't really want to back Jules here. I don't think it'll be a particularly high tackle or high foul game. I don't want to back Brentford shots. I would like to back Man City shots, but they're very, very short, so I don't see the value there. The only sort of thing available left is offsides. However, I think there's massive value in the offside market for this game. I'm not going to speak too much about it, but I will show you a graph and player stats. Um, when you filter Brentford's offsides by teams where they're massive underdogs, where they're unlikely to win, they've seen a massive uptick in offsides. So what I will do is I will utilize the new player stats feature here, and you can actually tick out games. So you can just press this little X. I've already done it, but you can tick this little X here at the top, and then it removes the game. So I filtered to all of the teams where Brentford would have been underdogs, where they would have sat back, been a bit more defensive. You can see by their results. In this, they've only won one game in all of these, and this is over the course of last season and this season as well. And you can see they very often hit at least two offsides. Two offsides is currently priced at 1.91 with Sky. And considering it landed this season against Liverpool already. It landed against City in both head-to-head games. They registered 2 and 3. It landed against Arsenal here all three times last season, including the EFL Cup game. Um, and it's landed against Liverpool this season and in Liverpool both head-to-head games last season. So two offsides just short of evens looks a brilliant price with that in mind. And I think there is ladder potential. You can see them registering at least two offsides or exactly two offsides most of the time, but they hit three offsides against City last time they were at the Etihad. So three offsides is just over 2 to 1, which looks good value. Four offsides is 6 to 1. Again, they're unlikely to hit sort of four offsides. However, there is potential there with the way that they sort of approach games. And so on a similar train of thought, I really like the thought of it'll be Wissa and Mbeumo as a strike partnership. As you can see, Mbeumo sort of missed a large portion of last season, but most recently he registered two offsides against Liverpool, one offside against Newcastle, one offside against Aston Villa at the end of last season. So he is priced at 2 to 1 to have an offside with Sky Bet. He's actually best priced with Ladbrokes for this for one offside at 3.6, but Ladbrokes are only offering one offside. Sky are offering two offsides at 14 to 1 for two offsides. Considering it landed very recently at Anfield, it does look pretty good value. Yeah, it's two. Yeah, if you place it as the bet builder where you go like 1 and 2, you'll probably get bigger odds. I haven't tested that, but yeah, thank you for that, David Rohan. It does look good value. I really like at least two offsides to land. It looks as if it's sort of Brentford's flaw with how they play. They'll play very aggressive, very direct. They won't see much of the ball, obviously, but when they do, they'll look to get in behind as soon as possible. And City do play quite a high line, which sort of tends to attract opposition offsides. So that's the only play for me this game. I think there's a lot of different ways you can sort of approach it, whether you want to go two offsides, three offsides, or you want to go Mbeumo offside, two offsides. Rissa is he's odds on for an offside, 1.91 with Sky, which I think is probably around a fair price or a bit too short for me. I think the value's in Mbeumo. Next game is Bournemouth against Chelsea, so moving away from the 3 o'clock kickoffs over to Saturday at 8 p.m. at the Vitality Stadium. Bournemouth are undefeated in the league so far, which is a complete contrast to last season, obviously, where they struggled under their new manager. They've drawn against Forest and Newcastle before beating Everton in what will probably be the comeback of the season already. Chelsea have been inconsistent. They lost to City, then they beat Wolves 6-2, and then they drew to Palace. In between those games, they've had to contend with Conference League, and they have progressed past Summit. So A difficult team to read. Chelsea, I think they're still sort of finding their feet under Maresca, but I think there's good value in this game once again. They have a couple of injuries to contend with, and that sort of provides an opportunity for us in this game, actually. The biggest news is Gusto being out, I think, with a thigh injury. Considering Reece James is also out, it probably leaves a bit of a hole at right back. Um, but what we can do is we can look into the games against Servette as a sort of indication on who will start here. So the player that's actually started at right back has been Disasi, which is unusual given his sort of physical profile. He isn't built like a fullback. He's he's stocky, he's slow, he's big, but Maresca obviously favours him as a right back, and he's played there against Servette, so he could be in line for a start here against Bournemouth. And my first pick is for him to make two tackles, which is currently priced at 2.9 with Ladbrokes. The only other book I've seen offer that is William Hill, and they're at 1.75. So pretty big disparity there. And I would say 1.75 is actually closer to a fair price. Um, but he started two games this season in the Conference League. At Stamford Bridge, he made one tackle and was dribbled past once. So he attempted a tackle and failed. And then in the away leg, he managed three tackles and was dribbled past once. Looking into his data from last season, he generally sees an uptick in tackles when he plays fullback, which obviously makes sense. He's more isolated. He sort of has to cover more ground when he's playing out wide. But he draws an ideal matchup here against Bournemouth, who drew the most tackles in the league last season. They've continued that trend into the new season with 24 tackles drawn from Forest, 21 tackles from Newcastle, 28 from West Ham in the EFL Cup, and 17 from Everton. So I think Jules are are a target here, and Disasi is the man that sort of presents the most value. With 365, the tackle line is very, very short. Again, it's something I would potentially back, but I just don't really see the value in it. Um, when these two sides faced up last season, Chelsea made 25 tackles. Um, so yeah, as I say, fullback tackles always a target. I think Disasi is priced as a centre back here, so there's sort of potential that the price drops. Hopefully it doesn't drop too much, but I would sort of take this down to maybe 2.4 or in the range of around 2.2 to 2.4. I would say is good value. 2.9 is just massive for a fullback playing against Brentford or playing against Bournemouth, who drew the most tackles in the league last season. Uh, Angle two for me here is a man I backed a lot before the international break, and it is Antoine Semenyo. He is priced at 1.83 with Bet365 to have three shots, and you can bump that up to 2.2 by adding a shot on target. If we look into his in the first game against Forest, oh, one second. In the first game against Forest, Semenyo got on the score sheet, opened his account for the season, um, and he started in a sort of striker role. He started as a centre forward. Um, it was an interesting one because the first half he didn't really look settled. He was sort of aimlessly pressing. He didn't see much of the ball. And Iraola must have recognized that, and he moved him back over to his favoured right wing position. Um, and throughout the game, he just sort of popped up wherever he was on the left wing. He was playing as an advanced midfielder on the right wing, just sort of wherever he found the opportunity to get on the ball, he was there. He saw so much of the ball. He had five shots in that game, two on target, and he scored the goal. So that straight away was a sort of sign for me that he's going to see a massive uptick in involvement in the attacking third without Solanke. And he's continued that trend. So he had seven shots against Newcastle in the next game at home. And then he had five shots against Everton, two on target, and a goal. So he's had at least three shots in every game so far. He's had at least five shots in every game so far. Um, So this price of 1.83 for three shots looks really, really good value. Again, ladder potential. Obviously, the only game he didn't have a shot was against Newcastle, but for someone to have seven shots with none on target, you won't get that happening very often. If we look into his sort of numbers last season, we can see whenever he has three shots, the vast majority of the time he will have at least one shot on target. The only time from this data set that he's failed was against Leicester in the FA Cup when he came off the bench. So again, I think the two stats are correlated, shots and shots on target, obviously. So having that odds against, I think is really, really good value. And I like it. I think he's one to target as the season progresses, especially when he plays on the right wing. I think if he was to shift over to the left, it wouldn't become as good to target him. But when he plays on the right, he has a sort of overlapping runs from his fullback, which allows him to invert, find himself in really good shooting positions, and he's not one to shy away from a long shot or get into the box, as we've seen so far this season. Next angle I've got is for Lewis Cook to commit a foul. It's another short one with Bet365, but he is set to start as the holding midfielder in this game. Philip Billing was on the injury report, which potentially works to increase his minutes. There's a good chance he plays the full 90 here. And so far this season, he has nine fouls in three games, with at least two fouls landing in every game. So one foul to land against Chelsea looks a good price on the surface. If we look into that a bit more, last season against Chelsea, he made one foul at Stamford Bridge, or he made one foul at home and four fouls at Stamford Bridge. So he was involved. He was involved heavily in duels, and I think it makes sense whenever you consider who he'll be matched up against. It will likely be Cole Palmer. He is 75% likely to start this game. Um, but even if he doesn't, I think he draws another great matchup against Nkunku. He should also find duels against the likes of Madueke, Pedro Neto, Nicholas Jackson, all good players to draw fouls. So as the holding midfielder, I think he looks really nice value. Obviously the 1.4 is a bit short, so we can have a look into things to double it with. Um, if we stick with the idea of Chelsea to make tackles, uh, looking into their team, the initial target would be Caicedo and Enzo Fernandez, obviously two holding midfielders. You'd imagine they are the two most involved. You'd imagine they get in the most duels of anyone. Enzo Fernandez looks really good value actually. He's 1.5 to make two tackles. Caicedo is 1.22 to make two tackles for context. And they'll sort of operate in similar zones. They'll find similar matchups. Again, to repeat, Bournemouth threw the most tackles in the league last season. So naturally, you'd want to sort of back a holding midfielder against him to make tackles. So far, Enzo Fernandez has featured in all five games for Chelsea, and he's made two tackles in every single one of those. So a combination of those two, of Enzo Fernandez to make two tackles and Bournemouth's Lewis Cook to make a foul, is 1.9, which I think is really, really nice value. I think they combine well. They're completely independent. And I think if the game is chaotic as we expect, I think Jules will want to target. Both Bournemouth and Chelsea sort of have very, very low PPDA stats this season. There is the high expectation for goals. We've got a very, very short goal line. So, so everything sort of points to the game being quite chaotic, quite open, and I think that lends itself to back tackles and fouls. Um, so that's the angles for Saturday done. We've got two games on Sunday, and I think both are actually target games. So first game is Wolves against Newcastle, 4:30 at Molineux. It's been a poor start for Wolves, with losses against Arsenal and Chelsea before drawing to follow Nottingham Forest. I think the loss of Pedro Neto will massively hinder them over the course of the season. Obviously, he was he had a sort of injury hit campaign last season, but Wolves were noticeably better when he did play. So he'll be a big miss. It's been the opposite for Newcastle. They are undefeated with victories over Southampton and Spurs before drawing to Bournemouth. There are no new injury concerns for Gary O'Neill's Wolves. He has quite a lot of capable depth and often uses five subs, which means you have to be sort of wary when going for player stats, especially for their attackers. They've completed the shift to a 4-2-3-1, um, but they're yet to sort of find their best starting lineup, I think. Bellegarde has typically been used on the left, but he started on the right last season, with Aït pushed into a sort of more attacking role. And also new signing Andre is expected to sort of have some sort of role in this game. So just want to be careful with. Mosquera also was stretched off in the international break, which likely leaves Wolves very, very light defensively, which is something I'll go into in a bit. Eddie Howe also has defensive absentees, with Shaw, Botman, and Lascelles out for this game. Emil Kraft is also a doubt, but he has a full attacking lineup to choose from. First angle I've got is Alexander Isak, anytime goal scorer at 2.37. I also really like his odds for a goal or assist if you're a bit more sort of risk averse. You can back him to score or assist at 1.91 with Sky. 365 are quite big. On here, you see the general market average is about 2.1. 365 just under 2.8, so again, suggestive of good value. But I just think Wolves is such a perfect matchup for him to have a really, really good game. They've looked poor defensively just as itself. The ship 6 goals to Chelsea, but Isak finds himself in fantastic form. I managed to watch him for Sweden in the international break. He scored a brace against Azerbaijan, and then he also scored against Estonia. So he should come into this game full of confidence. He's a player that's sort of at the peak of his powers, top of form right now, and he scored one goal in the season so far against Spurs. So he scored in the most recent Premier League game. Um, Another thing to note is he's played every available minute for Newcastle so far, in the absence of Callum Wilson. So again, 90 minutes against a defense like Wolves. I don't think he should be odds against to score. I think he's one of the best attackers in the league, one of the best goal scorers, and chances should be sort of very, very available for him in this game. As an added bonus, he will take penalties as well. And if he's on for the full 90, that's a massive benefit. Um, Sticking with goals, both teams to score and over 2.5 is 1.8 with 365. Um, Again, as I said, both teams are quite light defensively, but they have pretty much a full contingent in attack. So Newcastle obviously have their best three defenders arguably out. Um, Wolves are just light defensively anyway, since they sold Kilman. You've got Dawson who sort of had to contend with injuries. Mosquera will be out, so I don't think it looks good for them. But with that in mind, they're at home, they're winless. I think they'll go for it. I think they'll be attacking. They tend to sort of play quite front-footed against better opponents. We saw it against Chelsea, it didn't work. I think we'll see something similar against Newcastle. Maybe it'll be a slightly adapted press or something like that. But I do think there'll be goals in this game. Both teams to score and over 2.5 at 1.8 really stands out, and it landed last time these two met at Molineux as the game finished 2 each. Next angle for me is Wolves tackles. So I've been quite vocal about backing tackles against Newcastle. I think they're quite efficient at drawing tackles, especially since they've sort of had their players recover from injury and they've got pretty much a full contingent going forward at least. Wolves tackles so far read 19 against Arsenal, 19 against Chelsea, 23 against Burnley, and 25 against Forest. It's worth noting though that all of those games are pretty good for Wolves to make tackles. It's games where they sort of see less of the ball, and it's against teams that are quite sort of direct in their approach. However, Newcastle sort of fit that group as well. Um, if if Newcastle can see more of the ball than they usually do, which they should against Wolves, they are efficient at drawing tackles. They do play quite direct. They like to dribble with the likes of Isak, Gordon, Harvey Barnes. Um, the lowest count that they've drawn so far is 14 against Southampton, but in that game they had just 22% possession, so they barely saw any of the ball, but still went pretty close to the line really. And with that in mind, with their sort of rate of drawing tackles, you convert over 17.5 Wolves tackles at 1.44, which is short again, but considering the hit rates, considering it's landed in every Wolves game so far, considering it's landed in 2 out of 3 for Newcastle, I think it's a good sort of starting point for a double. If we look at what we can double it with, one of the key trends of Newcastle is how they struggle on the road. So straight away, even though it's a sort of game state based selection, I like the look of Wolves to have 10 or more shots, and you can double those two to get the price to 1.9. So obviously quite backable. Um, if we look into Newcastle's away games over this season and last, um, opponents have had at least 10 shots in 17 out of the 18 away games in all competitions. The only team to fail was Sunderland. So the Newcastle opponents had at least 10 shots in every league game last season. Wolves have been, despite losing Neto, they've still been good for creating chances. They haven't really struggled with that. They've had at least 10 shots in every game so far, apart from against Arsenal, where they had 9 shots. But arguably, you'd say that's the toughest matchup in the league for shots, going to the Emirates, and they were just one off. So, really like their chances against Newcastle at home, against a team that generally struggles. As I said, contextually, they are still yet to win. That will be in the back of Gary O'Neill's mind, and I think they'll be quite front-footed in their approach and really have a go at Newcastle, who have shown vulnerabilities on the road. Final bet from this game for me, and I mentioned it's probably worth being wary uh, targeting Wolves players because of how much depth they have and how willing Gary O'Neill is to make substitutions. However, the data of João Gomez to make fouls is pretty hard to ignore, um, especially for the matchup here. So the bet I've got in mind is for João Gomez to make 2 fouls and Bruno Guimaraes to draw 2 fouls, which is 1.91 with Sky. Gomez has made 10 fouls in 3 games. He's a very intense presser. He's not necessarily a cynical fouler where he'll sort of slide in and get booked on his first foul, but he generally makes his fouls by being too intense in the press, sort of too aggressive, getting too tight to his opponent. And because of that, he can tend to rack up fouls before getting booked. Against a player like Bruno Guimaraes, who is the complete opposite in the sense that he'll get on the ball, he'll invite pressure, he'll invite sort of challenges in towards him, and then go down pretty easily. It's the perfect matchup. Um, Gomez has made at least 3 fouls in every game so far in the league this season. 3 against Arsenal, 3 against Chelsea, 4 against Forest, and in that game against Forest, he was subbed up to 60 minutes. Um, he's averaging 2.39 fouls per game over the last 30 games. So again, the data for João Gomez is just brilliant. But it gets even better when you look at Bruno Guimaraes. So he's actually drawn at least 2 fouls in each of his last 10 games so far. His data is pretty ridiculous actually when it comes to fouls drawn. Um, this season, he's drawn 6 fouls against Southampton, 6 fouls against Bournemouth, 3 fouls against Forest, and 4 fouls against Spurs. So he's always in and amongst the fouls. He's landed at least 2 fouls drawn in each of his last 10. Um, so yeah, I think it's a no-brainer to target that matchup. You've got a player who likes to be intense in his press. You've got a player who goes down very easily. Um, so that would be the final one for me. It's Gomez 2 fouls, Bruno Guimaraes 2 fouls drawn at 1.91 with Sky. I think the same bet is so yeah, good value on Rafa. And let's move on to the final game, which is the big one, Tottenham against Arsenal. I've got quite a lot to go through for this one, quite a lot to pick apart. Um, we'll, I'll be posting these to Telegram over the course of today and tomorrow. So by Saturday, they will all be posted. First bet for Tottenham against Arsenal. Oh, this is actually the biggest game of the weekend, North London derby, 2 p.m. on Sunday. Um, if you think back to Spurs at the start of last season, they started really hot. They were top of the league, but they've been unable to replicate that form. They drew to Leicester, beat a depleted Everton side, and then lost to Newcastle. Arsenal started flawless with back-to-back 2-0 wins against Wolves and Aston Villa. Um, but they were recently very lucky against Brighton. They had Declan Rice sent off and scraped a 1-1 draw. Bit of injury sort of news to look into for this one. Obviously, Rice and Odegaard being out is big news. However, I think for Spurs, they've actually been overlooked a bit because Solanke and Richarlison are set to miss this clash. Um, but I think that presents an ideal opportunity to actually back Son because he is likely to start as the main striker here in the absence of those two, as he did against Everton. So he registered one shot against Leicester, one shot in his most recent game. In between that, he scored a brace against Everton when he started as a central striker. So when he starts up front, he obviously has a lot more chances, a lot better chances, and he's currently priced at 1.66 to have a shot on target with Bet365. I think that's massive value. I think that's probably the best value we'll find on this game, especially if he starts as striker. Um, you could actually boost it to evens by adding an extra shot. So by doing Son shot on target and Son over 1.5 shots, you get that to evens. So looks pretty good. It's probably worth noting though, I would only take this if Son is confirmed to start up front. So I would be wary, or I'd keep an eye on team sheets, just have a look an hour before, and if it looks good, then go for it. But as I say, just be wary. Angle two for me is a match tackles ladder. Sorry, 1 second. Just getting an error message. 1 second. I'm not 100% sure if it's still going. I am gonna just assume it is though. Um, Angle two for me is a match tackles ladder. Again, I've seen a lot of people go on this, but I think the value is massive here, and the prices have actually held so far. So I am gonna go for it as well. The line is set at 36.5, which looks like an average line on the surface. But when you consider the head-to-head games, I think it should be way higher than just an average line. Um, Last season, there were 52 tackles at the Emirates, split 24 for Arsenal, 28 for Spurs, and then 48 tackles at the London Stadium with 24 tackles each. I think with Arsenal having so many injuries, I think Arteta will obviously recognize that duels are important here. Winning duels is incredibly important. So I think you'll go with sort of like a Timber or Havertz in midfield, just to sort of bolster the physicality. Um, Spurs so far have seen 45 match tackles against Leicester, 48 against Everton, 40 against Newcastle. So they've gone over the line in all three games. Similarly, Arsenal have seen 37 tackles against Wolves, 39 against Villa, 33 against Brighton. So just one miss. Data's fantastic, ladder potential. I think being a derby, the line just sort of has to be inflated and it hasn't been. So I really, really like the value here with match tackles. Another thing I also like is Romero passes. Um, Last season he had 74 passes at the Emirates and 67 or 66, sorry, at home. However, looking a bit deeper into that game, he had 52 in the first half and then 14 in the second, which is obviously a bit unusual. But it turns out he actually played as pretty much a striker in that second half when Spurs were chasing the game. But I doubt we see that again. The supremacy here is much tighter. I don't think Arsenal run away with it. Um, and Spurs being underdogs at home, hopefully we see a positive game state in which Arsenal take the lead and Spurs will rack up the passes when they sit back. But overall, Spurs should see much more of the ball. They had a higher possession in both head-to-head games last season against Arsenal. And with Arsenal not too intent on pressing the centre backs, Romero should be able to rack up passes and go over this line, especially with the right game state. I think this stream has stopped. Give me a second. Okay, I'll just finish it off. There is just two more angles to go through. First is Pedro Porro to have a shot and a foul, which comes out at 1.86 with Bet365. A shot has landed in 15 out of 17 home games last season in all competitions, with Porro averaging 1.83 shots per 90. Last time he faced Arsenal, he had exactly three shots. He's a player who I think will be up for this game. I think he's a sort of more emotional player. I think he'll be very, very aggressive. I think the crowd will be loud and sort of spur him on. He's had a shot in every game so far this season, including six last game against Newcastle. So 1.36 looks a great price to act as sort of like the first leg of a double. I'm going to stick with Porro for the second leg and add a foul. So last season he had one foul against Arsenal at home and zero fouls away, but he hasn't faced Martinelli as a direct opponent. Um, with that in mind, when he had zero fouls, he also made five tackles and two dribble passes. So he was heavily involved on the dual front. Now he's expected to be up against Martinelli. You'll see a lot of the ball. He'll be sort of willing to directly go up against him. So I really like his foul price. Um, he's made a foul in every game so far this season. Again, so two fouls against Leicester, two against Everton, one against Newcastle. So this bet has landed in every game so far this season. So I really like the odds of 1.86. Again, sticking with the idea of backing duels. Um, Spurs made 19 fouls at the Emirates last season and 12 fouls at home. 12 fouls is currently priced at 1.67 with Sky, which is obviously quite short, but you can boost that by adding Saka to be fouled twice. I think if Arsenal are to draw 12 fouls, you'd more than likely get Saka contributing to at least two of those. I think he's got a perfect matchup against Udogie. He will likely see a lot more of the ball with Odegaard out. Um, so it's a nice sort of addition you can do by just boosting that. I think if you do the same thing with Paddy Power, this price goes to 1.89. So again, suggestive of good value. Saka was fouled four times against Spurs last season at the London Stadium, matched up against Ben Davies, and then three times against Udogie at the Emirates. I think Udogie will look to be tight, he'll look to be aggressive, and Saka has this sort of tendency to draw fouls quite easily. So, yeah, as he has done this season so far, he's drawn at least two fouls against Wolves, four against Villa, two two against Brighton, and Udogie has made a foul in every game to go along with that. So I think there's good value in that price. I think it shouldn't be as high as it is when you double those two that are not necessarily independent. Um, but for now, that will be all of the bets I've gone through. It's been quite a long stream, so apologies for that. But I hope there's been enough value for you to take from it. Thank you for all of those who have tuned in. who have left a comment, who've liked, who subscribed. I know we had a bit of issues of in this game towards the end, but as I say, it's my first stream. I think it'll only get better. Thank you very much for listening. All of these bets will be posted on Twitter with sort of full written analysis, and they'll be posted on Telegram as well with my advice taking plan. So make sure you're following on there. Once again, thank you for your support. Really appreciate it, and I hope you've been able to take some value from this.